A very good afternoon to all of you, lovely people who have logged in this afternoon. It's a pleasure to have you join us today as we kick off our very first roundtable of the year. And what better way to do this than hosting an array of super powerful women leaders who have been instrumental in shaping the future of modern marketing and also have been a huge inspiration to the women workforce. MMA takes great pride in hosting this roundtable today, given a heightened focus on shaping the future of modern marketing. And what better day could we have chosen to enable thought leadership on it than the eve of Women's Day? Before I move further, I'd like to quickly wish all of you women panelists, our lovely audience, a very happy Women's Day in advance as we celebrate and inspire future women leaders with our specially curated roundtable today. Now, without much further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for today, SAPNA CHADHA, Vice President, Marketing, India, Southeast Asia, and South Asia, Google Asia Pacific, and who also is an extremely engaged MMA India and MMA APAC board member. She is responsible for all of Google's marketing initiatives, including brand, strat, consumer marketing, B2B marketing, and acquisition growth. Sapna's core strengths from her 20+ years in marketing are in creating integrated multi-channel marketing and customer experience strategies. She also is a huge champion of diversity and inclusion, both in her work and in her industry contributions. She is an advisory board member to the World Women Foundation. In fact, Google has been extremely committed towards women empowerment, and its program, Internet Sati, had touched 30 million women. While we speak, they have a goal of enabling 1 million women entrepreneurs in India alone. In fact, Sapna is leading Google to make certain products more inclusive and helpful for women entrepreneurs, with the launch of women-led businesses on search and maps, business pages on Google Pay for home-based entrepreneurs. So, Sapna, I now open the floor to you. Welcome aboard.
Great, thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here, and I hope everybody can hear me and see me okay. I'm just gonna present my screen. Just give me a second. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I'm gonna get started, but let me first say a happy Women's Day to everyone, or Women's Week. Tomorrow's Women's Day and International Women's Day. I'm very excited that the MMA has chosen this week to really engage on this topic. I must commend the MMA and the entire board for paying attention to diversity and inclusion, and for making sure that the efforts that we have in this space are really taken into the fore completely. You know, it's important that we up-level the thinking in this area, and I know the board has been committed to make sure that it's noticed, that we have the right equity and the right inclusion in terms of representation and otherwise. And so with that, again, a big thank you to MONEKA and the rest of the board and Preethi as we get off today. So the world is a crazy place right now, and while there are many things that are clearly out of our control, there is one that I think is more in control than we think, and that's gender equity. And while I've been fortunate and experienced strong allyship throughout my career, I've definitely faced gender bias. You know, the simplest example being, you know, spoken over during many a meeting during my time, and maybe more severe instances as well. But I can say, and Lloyd talked about my 20 years of experience, it doesn't feel that long. But getting through these biases and breaking the bias is something that is near and dear to my heart. And I really must commend the International Women's Day leadership this year for the hashtag and the movement that they're creating, which is really around breaking the bias. We all need to be in our respective places as marketers and realize that the role that we play in terms of breaking the bias is immense. The expectation is on brands to really keep up and move from this place where inclusive marketing is something that's nice to have to something that is a must-do for everyone. At Google, we're committed to championing change, and we've started this, whether it be in terms of product inclusion or the marketing that we're doing, but we have a long way to go. And I want to specifically focus on one thing that I said just now, which was the role that each of us play in the work that we do. I think we underestimate our role as marketers in terms of driving change. This is not an HR thing. This really comes down to the work that we do. And let me give you an example. So the sport of archery suddenly became popular with girls in the last decade. I don't know if anybody can guess the reason why, but the reason why was that it's because it coincided with two movies starring female leads as archers, The Hunger Games and Brave. And in a study that examined the correlation, 7 out of 10 girls said that they'd taken up the sport because they were inspired by either Katniss or Merida. So the characters that we see on screen play a huge role in determining the roles that are occupied off screen. You know, the Gina Davis Institute in the US on gender and media, they started collecting data on movies. And the team analyzed hundreds of live action films to understand women and male representation. And we realized at Google that we could look at the same kind of approach and look at advertising and look at marketing. And inspired by that collaboration, we teamed up with the Gina Davis Institute, and we used machine learning and artificial intelligence to look at representation in advertising. And we analyzed over 3 million around 3 million YouTube videos uploaded by advertisers and accounted for the number of times they were viewed over the last 5 years. And what did we find? We found that male characters were seen nearly 1.5 times more often in videos from India. The differences are different from market to market when you look at screen time by gender, but it's broadly the same across the world. I would say we have our work cut out when it comes to thinking about marketing in India. It's probably veering to the side of the spectrum that's not best in class across the world. And if you break down this further by industry and by verticals, the numbers are even more skewed. We'll send out this link afterwards, but this short link, you can go there, you can select your vertical, the category that you represent, and you can understand just where we are in terms of representation, both screen time, the amount of speaking time, and other dimensions. Now, why is this important? Well, while the industry is still dominated by men, even though 70 to 80% of consumer purchasing is influenced by women through a combination of buying power and influence. So we know this. We know that as brands and as advertisers and as marketers, women decision makers are important. And so where does this all start from? This all starts from the representation in the rooms that we're in. I can tell you at Google, we spend a lot of time thinking about this and understanding, are we being transparent about the mix that exists in our workforce? Are we being transparent around the efforts that we should be taking towards equity and inclusion? Are we all doing enough? I'm a woman in tech. The landscape is not super. It's not great right now. We have our ways to go. I can say that as Google in our diversity annual report, we're at the best we ever could be, but it's not the best around the sectors that we're working in. Seemingly, sometimes women are missing in action, and we have the responsibility to fix this now. And we need to think about representation really wholeheartedly across the board on everything that we do. And I want to end with, I feel a privilege in the position that I'm in to really make a difference. I hope those of you on the call, I know this panel that you're going to hear from today feels incredibly privileged in the positions we are to make a change. That's why we've all joined this panel. I think we all want to build an inclusive world where marketing is not just is truly representing the world in which we market to, that we are breaking down barriers, that we are making information accessible, that we're enabling and empowering groups to succeed, because businesses are brands. And we need to make sure that we all are responsible in our community, in our journeys, to think about inclusion across the board. And I wanted to share one thing that we just released yesterday. I recall seeing some data around women's representation in sports, and when it comes to sponsorship or marketing of female teams, we have a long way to go. We need to focus on really finding solutions to make sure that representation is in the work that we do, that is showing up, that we're not biased in our efforts. Let's be clear, sports has always been something that is more male dominated. But when you think about where people are spending their time, I was proud to see yesterday that the women's team really did us proud playing. And when we thought about the representation that exists in this space, we have a long way to go. And I want to share one film that we released yesterday.
ओए क्रिकेट एक्सपर्ट विमेंस क्रिकेट टीम के बारे में क्या जानता है?
बस इतना कि वो भी खेलती है।
वाइड बॉल यार, गूगल से पूछ।
ओके गूगल, भारतीय महिला क्रिकेट टीम के बारे में बताओ।
भारतीय महिला क्रिकेट टीम जो विमेन इन
सबसे ज्यादा रन बनाने वाली महिला खिलाड़ी,
मिताली राज,
सर्वाधिक विकेट लेने वाली महिला खिलाड़ी,
झूलन गोस्वामी।
इस बार की मैगजीन कवर स्टोरी के लिए एनी आइडियाज?
इंडियन विमेंस क्रिकेट टीम।
क्यों?
विनिंग परसेंटेज 50 से ज्यादा, दुनिया की हाईएस्ट विकेट टेकर इंडियन, हाईएस्ट रन स्कोरर इंडियन, 2 बार वर्ल्ड कप फाइनलिस्ट, 6 बार एशिया कप विनर्स। आपके क्यों का जवाब तो ये रोज दे रही हैं।
बोलने से एक नई इनिंग स्टार्ट होगी, बोलने से सब होगा।
And with that, I will hand it back to Lloyd for the rest of the agenda.
Thanks so much for that lovely session, Sapna. In fact, that bit about that cricket bit had me also pretty stunned. That's pretty cool. In fact, thanks so much for setting the perfect tone to this roundtable and for further inspiring our women leaders of tomorrow, who possibly are also in this very audience that we are hosting this evening. I'd now like to quickly call on our next speaker for today. Okay, I take this opportunity to invite Preethi Reddy, who is the Chairwoman, Insights Division, South Asia at Kantar. Preethi also is a very engaged MMA India board member. And in the last 3 decades of experience, she has, in fact, successfully handled roles across innovation and research, adoption of new non-conscious methods of understanding consumers, applying sophisticated analytic capabilities to integrated data to help transform consumer insights into fabulous business impact for clients. Preethi has been on the list of Impact's 50 most influential women in Indian media, marketing and advertising for 5 consecutive years since 2016, and is also currently chairperson of CII's India Women Network Maharashtra chapter. Preethi will be sharing a few key findings from the Reykjavik Index of Leadership, which according to her has some amazingly startling and discussion-worthy revelations for us about how women's leadership is perceived. So Preethi, please do take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Lloyd. I'm just going to share my screen, if you would let me, yeah. So thank you for having me on the panel. And it's a pleasure today to share some learnings from the work that Kantar has been doing globally in the area of how society perceives women in leadership roles. This is important because, you know, this year's theme is breaking the bias, and bias comes from perception. So it is important to know how, you know, common civil society views women leadership. The Reykjavik Index is, okay. It's a measure of how men and women are viewed in terms of their suitability for leadership. It's a very simple question. The index is created through a question which basically says, you know, we asked for 23 sectors, sector by sector, we asked, do you think men or women are better suited for leadership positions? And the response can be men are better, women are better, both are equal. And this is done across right now about 10 countries, including the G7 countries, and India was added 2 years back. And what we're aiming for, the ultimate goal is to have an index of 100, which means that the perception is that men and women are equally suited for any role in any sector, for leadership roles in any sector. I'll share with you some, so as I said, 23 sectors. This is what the basic, you know, top line kind of finding is, that the G7 nations, the index is 73, UK, Canada, USA, expectedly France are ahead. And India is in a cluster with Italy, Japan, Germany. So it's in that cluster. It's not bad, but it's not great. And I just want to remind you that this is a measure really of prejudice. It's a measure of bias, and we're trying to move towards 100. If you look at, we saw this data earlier. If you look at men versus women, in India, unlike all the other countries, women in India have a score of 69 compared to men who have a score of 68. And what this really means is that men and women perceive women in leadership similarly. It's actually a different finding from the other countries, where there is a much sharper difference between what men think and what women think, which is, you know, good news for us, because it also means that any efforts to improve how women are perceived in India have to target both men and women. And over the years, over 19 and 20, actually, India has only shown a very small improvement. The improvement has been in pharma and medical, in media and education and BFSI. The sectors with the lowest scores of the index are automotive, fashion, beauty, and childcare. What that means is, the low score means that childcare is overwhelmingly perceived as a profession that is suitable for women or women leaders. Fashion and beauty is also women, and automotive manufacturing is largely men, which is why it is, you know, unequal. Sectors that are improving and declining on gender equality: healthcare, automotive is actually improved in terms of equality, defense, police, pharma, food and drink, which is probably related to the ongoing pandemic, the work from home environment, and recent changes in policies for the army, for women in the army could be some of the, you know, the drivers causing these shifts. But unfortunately, there's a step back in sectors like foreign affairs and diplomacy, high-tech, artificial, AI. A lot of the, you know, the prejudices against women in STEM seem to be playing out here. The older age group tends to have lower equality. Older men have the lowest overall score. So the older you are, the less likely you are to think that women and men are equal. And we have a specific question: how comfortable is society with women as CEOs? With it, 44% of women are comfortable with women in CEO positions as compared to 37% of men. So it's just about it's not such a huge gap, but more women think that women can be CEOs than do men. And in political leadership, it's an even wider gap actually. That men don't think that don't see equality in political leadership for women. Women think that political leadership, women are better suited for political leadership. So in terms of comfort, having a woman as a head of government. So this is just basically a very highlight, key findings that we found. I think net what we're really saying is that in India, there's a lot of ground to cover. We're not at the bottom of the pile, but we're not above the rest of the world by any measure. But also interestingly, if you look at the perceptual measures, that these are perceptions, right? These are prejudices or perceptions. The numbers are actually better than if you were to actually look at actual data. I mean, 40% think that women CEOs, that they're comfortable with women CEOs, but there are only some 4% of women CEOs actually in India. So, 50% think that there is that women are suitable for as politicians, but in the world's largest democracy, only 14% of India's parliament are women, and this is certainly not reflected. This inclusion, etc., is certainly not reflected in how people are paid and what actually is happening on the ground. So that's. As a context, I think it's a useful context because it tells you that there are prejudices, but they're not as strong as we thought they were. And but unfortunately, they haven't improved over the last year or so. Lloyd, that's what I had to present to set the context and lead to the discussion, hopefully.
Sure. Thanks so much, Preethi. I'm sure there would have been quite a lot of raised eyebrows in the audience. This is what you shared with us, and it's quite a reveal. And I'm sure the panelists also are waiting to come on board and discuss that a bit more. But before I begin, there are a couple of things which I'd like to take the audiences through. This is basically a hygiene slide, which is for you audiences. While we proceed with the session, we would request whoever has a particular pertinent question, whether it be for the entire panel or for a particular speaker, please follow these particular protocols. It will just help us streamline the process. I think the slide is self-explanatory. I'll really look forward for you all to please follow the same before posting any questions. Well, now coming to the most interesting second portion, or rather second part of today's roundtable. I'd like to quickly introduce you to today's moderator of today's discussion. Okay. As her profile on a few platforms reads as someone who loves reading books, is in a perpetual cosmic war with roaches, a geek, a poet, loves animals, and is also, interestingly, a trained clinical psychologist. I'd like to invite the managing editor of Afaqs, ASHWINI GANGAL, to take ahead this discussion. ASHWINI, the floor is all yours.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lloyd. What a wonderful introduction. Thank you. Such a pleasure and such an honor to be here. Hi, audience. I can't see you, but you can see me. You can see all of us. So thank you all for being here. And I'd like my panel to please come up on the screen, so we can start the roundtable discussion. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to this roundtable. Now, you've already been introduced to SAPNA and Preethi. I will just quickly tell you who else is there. We've got MONEKA, Country Head of MMA India. We've got RUBEENA Singh, Country Manager of Josh, and GEETANJALI, Executive Director, Africa, India, and Middle East Advisory Services, EY. So thank you all very much for being here. Let's start. Now, we have about 35 minutes in hand, and I plan to make the most of it. I have a lot of questions. So I'm just going to begin with something that I am personally quite conflicted about. Okay. I want to know whether we do a disservice to ourselves by bringing in the gender prism and the gender lens in our nomenclature, in our analysis of things. For example, today, am I doing this roundtable with a group of female leaders, or am I doing it with a group of leaders? You know, that's what I'm trying to get at. So I understand that the goal is gender neutrality. I also understand that we need to consciously champion women. Are these two goals in conflict? Are they mutually exclusive? Or are they both on a linear path where one will maybe lead to the other? So I want all my panelists to respond to this question. Where are you at when it comes to this conflict that I haven't resolved? So let's start with SAPNA.
Oh, wow. Okay. Where am I on this conflict? I am, look, I think the way I see it is we need to acknowledge differences and not be afraid to discuss them. I think the more and more I realize in organizations, people are afraid to talk about bias, afraid to talk about difference, are afraid to call things out. And they're just overall, there's just a big fear. When I think about my role as at Google, we need to develop products for everyone. That means we need to acknowledge differences. And at the same time, we need to acknowledge where there might be bias. And for all of this, it requires that word that I said, which is acknowledging. I fear, and that fear is holding everyone back in having productive conversations, and everybody's tiptoeing around some of this. So where I am is, I think we should embrace differences, talk about the biases that exist, and ultimately build for everyone. That's what marketing is, right? Ultimately, it's reaching everyone, building for everyone. And for that, you need to understand your audiences. So let's also not be so afraid to call out differences where they exist.
Okay. Yeah, sure, Sapna. You know, this reminds me of a quote that men and women are equal but not identical. So, yeah. GEETANJALI, I'll come to you. You know, hand on heart, are we doing ourselves a disservice by highlighting the differences and by saying female leaders, a panel of women leaders on Women's Day? Is there a conflict inherently there?
Yeah. No, I'm so glad you asked this question, because I genuinely feel that, whether you're a man or a woman, we're all a product of our environment, right? So if you're set in a cultural context where the cultural demands of that environment are for you to behave a particular way, then it's completely up to us, whether male or female, to actually dip into ourselves and figure how we're going to fight through this cultural context, right? So I don't think, there could be enough reasons for men. We have this conversation every day at home where men feel intimidated by strong women, right? And that's something they struggle with. And that's the context that they're living in today. So I think there are lots of subtexts for every kind of leader. And I think the challenge that I feel that we need to address as women, at least I look at that every day, is to say, are we doing enough within our own selves to be able to make ourselves quantifiable in what we bring to the table, right? And the moment your output becomes all that you are, then you're able to take care of all the other subtexts, right? Because then you're just a product of the work you bring to the table, right? Particularly in consulting, for example, you're surrounded by about 30 people in that virtual meeting, all male. And you're standing there trying to sort of get things done. And it always starts with what we call microaggressions, right? Because there are these subtle, undertones, and Sapna spoke very beautifully of them, that you've spoken above, what you're trying to say. And these are subtle, right? Now you can either choose to catch them and make a big deal of them, or you can just let over time your work shine through it all. And then you reach a point where you really become a product of what you bring to the table. And I strongly believe that should be our goal focus of even when we raise the rest of the women who work around with us, to say, let's focus on what you're bringing to the table rather than on the differences. But I respect the fact that there is much to be done on the differences, but I prefer to move away from them and face, the ability to quantify what we do. that itself is missing, right? We don't ask for money. So for a large part of the beginning of my career, I went in saying, if I'm good, it'll be recognized. And I realized it was my problem that I didn't quantify how good I was, right? So it comes back to, are we really being trained and raised as girls, as daughters, as leaders, as people in our team to say, hey, if this is what you're doing, what are your KPIs? And the next guy on the block, whether he's male or female, what are his KPIs? And how are you ensuring that, you know, you get equal pay for equal output? And that's what it's all about. So that's really my, you know, feeling of how I like to look at this as a lens.
Sure, I hear you. I hear you. RUBEENA, I'll come to you. You remember, just coincidentally, you, me, SAPNA were on another panel and we were discussing the same thing. And that time I asked you about whether it's important to be gender blind or gender brave, and whether there's a long way to go before we can actually be gender blind and, you know, not insist on an equal number of resumes from men and women and then choose. You know, so it's a similar question. I've recycled it a little bit, but it's pretty much the same thing. You know, is the gender prism doing us a disservice or a service right now?
I think, you know, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my own self, Ashwini, how I think about it. I think initially, in the first few years of my career, you know, I said, you know, I want to be gender blind, like GEETANJALI said, you know, want to be known for the work that I put out and not because I'm a woman or otherwise. But I think over the last few years, I have matured a bit and I reflect on, you know, how the journey has been. And, you know, and somebody asked me this question interestingly, what would you not do, you know, if you were to go back 20 years? I think I tried to fit in the boys' club. It served its purpose, right? Got me success, got acceptability, etc. But would I do it again? Would I encourage other women to do it? No, absolutely not. I think we have to learn how to celebrate our differences. There are inherent differences between men and women. And I'm not going to say one is better than the other, but we have to learn to recognize and celebrate those differences. And I think there is no harm in, therefore, you know, and where we are right now in this stage where we are still, I was just reading articles, we're like decades away from a gender neutral world, right? So I think calling out, therefore, and saying that spreading the awareness, getting people more and more aware and conscious of biases, which are unconscious or even benevolent, you know, both sides, I think is very, very important right now.
Yeah, okay, right. Monica, I'll come to you next. What's your opening remark?
Opening remark. Okay, so I really think a lot of the women on the panel have covered it. That's the disadvantage of coming at the end. Nevertheless, what I'd like to add to it is I think there's something called male energy in the room and female energy in the room. The male energy brings its own qualities, all right? And the female energy brings her own qualities. And I think as long as we know how both complement each other, the chemistry and combination really works out, because at the end of the day, the female energy is the energy in the room which brings collaboration, brings a high level of EQ, okay, and has the level of empathy, which is just, they're just naturally wired like that. They're just genetically wired like that. So if the larger community appreciates those qualities and therefore why the need for the woman in the room, then I think it takes care of itself.
EQ, empathy. I will come back to you on those. I do have a follow-up question. Yeah, but thank you for that. Preethi, coming to you, you know, I'm actually dying to ask you what India possibly has in common with Italy, Japan, and Germany. So can I quickly ask you that, and then I'll ask you my other questions.
But you know, I think if you understand, if you know the cultures of Italy, Japan, and Germany, you know they're very alpha male countries. You know, they're very unequal in the way that women are treated.
Yeah.
Not bad you, but that the patriarchy is quite powerful in those countries. So that I'm not surprised that that's where India belongs. Actually, to come back to your question, which everybody has articulated so beautifully, the need for diversity, etc. My view on this really is that, you know, what is an equal workplace? How would you define a workplace as being equal? Where each gender can participate fully, equally. It is where there is equal opportunity to get leadership status. It is where there is acceptance of caregiving, family responsibilities, and where there is equal work for equal pay. None of those currently operate, even in the organizations where we work. So there is, I mean, you have to, sometimes equity needs affirmative action. And, you know, and the fact that till you get to a place where things are equal, you have to say that, you know, we have to do something special for women. It doesn't have to be that, you know, I don't think any woman wants to be promoted or given more money if they're not deserving of it.
Yeah.
The fact is that you don't have equal opportunity even when you start. So that's, you know, that's really my take on it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I read somewhere, you know, don't give me something because of my gender or in spite of my gender.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. Now, just to pick up a point from what Monica said 2 minutes ago, you know, that EQ and empathy, female energy, do you agree with her? And the question is, are male and female leaders inherently different? I'm not quite sure. I mean, what do you think? I'd like everyone to come in on this. Are there differences? I mean, really, do women leaders have more EQ and more empathy?
No, absolutely. I mean, I really believe that that's true.
Okay.
I think that the success and failure of a lot of organizations is based on the leadership style, right? And I think women have a very, very different leadership style. I think you saw that in the pandemic. You saw how women leaders, you know, looked at the whole pandemic and the way of resolving it differently. You saw the success of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to, in that point, like RUBEENA said, to acknowledge the fact that we have some very, very visible strengths, and those strengths, exactly empathy, EQ are those strengths. Whether we should be demanding for a different way of being because of those strengths is the context that I differ on, but we certainly have very clear leadership styles that are different. I've had examples in my past instance where I was sought for that, right? So a lot of organizations actually seek out for particular roles, women, because those roles require empathy, right? The problem that I have is that hard-nosed roles don't easily get women, right? And that's the problem that I have, that if I'm good enough to be empathetic, why do you assume that I can't take a P&L and own a revenue because that's a hard-nosed profile, right? And I think that's the challenge that I feel needs to be addressed, to say we can do both, but if we can do empathy better, then our leadership style will result in something more magnetically different than, you know, a male leader would. That's my view. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Sapna, do you agree? RUBEENA, Preethi, come in here, please. Are men and women really?
Can I do? I'm supposed to
leaders?
put up
Yes.
my hand and stuff, I think.
Please.
I wanted to add to what GEETANJALI was saying was, I think I've been in the business longer than anybody else on this panel. So I think over time, what I've seen is that there is an appreciation not of men, women, as much as the male way of operating and the female way of operating, the feminine attributes people are realizing are actually more effective in today's world. You know, the collaboration, the empathy, the democratic way of working rather than top down. So that can be, you know, a man can be like that, and a woman can be a very alpha, and a man can. So I think the
yes, exactly,
towards a more feminine style of leadership, and I don't mean it in a gender sense. I mean it in a way of operating, really.
Okay, you know, because I was speaking to a few men before this, and you know, they said, hey, it's a bias that women are more empathetic, and why are you genderizing something that ought to be gender neutral? There can be a woman low on empathy and a man high on empathy, which is why I started with the whole disservice.
Ashwini, if I may just jump in there for a very short while. You know, it's not, first of all, of course, generalization does not mean 100% of the community, right? But having said that, I think just naturally, if you look at the DNA of women, and especially now that we're talking leadership, etc., these are women who are managing family, who are parenting, you know, who've really had an opportunity to hone their life skills in that space immensely, you know, and for a very long period of time, like you're doing it for years and years. So you kind of know you build the collaboration and the empathy a lot over that period of time, and which is why it nourishes itself in such roles when they have to, you know, kind of be front facing. So that's the reason. So that doesn't mean that there are no exceptions to this or there aren't enough men like that. It's just that by default, women have had multiple roles to play and they've had an opportunity to hone it more.
Right. Yeah. Which might also be problematic in its own way, because that's a bit like saying that child rearing is a woman's domain. So why not? So, what I mean, it's actually more layered than just saying women leaders have these attributes and men leaders have these attributes. Sapna, do you agree? What do you think? Are we inherently different as leaders?
See, I think people are different and each leader is different from person to person. But I think the problem we have is that there are biases in terms of what we think are female leadership attributes and male leadership attributes. And I have done this workshop internally at Google where we asked this question. Take these characteristics, say which ones do you think they're more male or do you think they're more female? Or do you think they're neutral? And actually women usually are the ones that say that like things like being aggressive, being strategic, being a certain way are more male in terms of attributes. So the question is very open. Is it male? Is it female? Is it neutral? It's ideally everybody should be picking that these things are neutral. Yeah. But actually women, many times I've been in this workshop and it disappoints me, right? That we as women think that we can't be this way. I think as I hear, RUBEENA, PREETI, GEETANJALI, MONEKA, I think we've learned from our experience, right? And over time we see that we can be strategic. Both genders can be strategic. Both genders can be committed. Both genders can be aggressive, right? And we talk about women being emotional. I think that is, that's not fair. Empathetic is not emotional. And so we need to call this out. I personally think that leaders have attributes that are not based on gender.
Yes. High on EQ is not equal to emotional. Yeah. RUBEENA, what about you? What's your take on this before I go to my next question? Are men and women actually different as leaders? And if yes, in what way?
I think, over the years with the workforce changing and the demands changing, right? In today's world, to be a successful leader, one's got to be collaborative, one's got to be empathetic. You're working with new people, young people, you've got to learn how to take them along. That old style of working, which was very top down, I think is a bit passé in today's world, right? So I think it's not just about I sort of agree with what Preethi said. It's the traits which were more, which are thought of to be more feminine, which could be collaborative, which could be inclusive, it could be taking people along, being more patient. I think men also have had to develop those traits. And women, as you go through your experiences, you realize to be a leader, you cannot be a leader just with these traits. You also have to be strategic. You also have to sometimes learn how to say no the hard way. You have to get hard jobs done. You have to be in difficult positions and take difficult decisions. And all of us who are on the panel, I'm sure everybody will agree, we've done it when the time has required that. So I think, leadership to me is, I think it's gender agnostic. To be a good leader, you've got to have a combination of some traditionally thought of feminine and masculine traits, but whether it's a man or a woman, everybody needs to come learn what they don't have inherently and then put it all together, and they learn it through the experience. That's what I feel.
Sure. Okay. Now, when it comes to pauses, we know what it takes to do one's bit. Okay. You can check the label on a bottle to see if it's cruelty free. You can segregate your garbage. You can call out a racist remark. But when it comes to gender fairness, what does doing your bit mean to you at the workplace? So I'd like all of you to share personal examples, anecdotes, if you can, of things you've done consciously to this end. So we can start anyway. GEETANJALI, what have you done consciously? What's your bit? What do you do for this?
Yeah, I think lifting our tribe is something that, consciously we need to do every time. And I think I'm surrounded by, I in fact dedicate my Saturdays to that, by a lot of women who are not able to balance what they need to be portraying themselves as at work and what they need to be doing as family people, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge that happens once you cross middle management, right? Because until then, it's pretty much operational, right? When it's operational, you can swing a lot of work-life balance. But when it starts becoming at a higher level, you need to be able to train yourself to do that. And these skills don't come easy, right? And I think we learned from our mentors a lot of understanding of how to balance this, and to be able to do this consciously by having discussions with younger girls, with women who are in my team, who are constantly having to take that decision of saying, how do I say no? How do I make sure that I'm asking for more without sounding greedy or overambitious, right? These are very, very subtle ways of them wanting to grow but not knowing how to do it. So one is that. Second is sensitizing males around me to be allies to the women in their team. Right. And I think because of the way we raised, I have a son, and I know that consciously as a mother, to raise that son to know that he has to do the dishes doesn't come easy in the Indian family. Right. So around us, the males at work need to be pointed out when there are subtexts or microaggressions, that I call them, so that they're conscious, because some of the times they're not even conscious they're doing it. Right. So I think these are the two things I consciously work on. One is to lift my tribe and women around to say, here's how you need to check, improve, scale up, and make men our allies and make them realize what they can do to actually support the women in the group.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Monica, what about you? When it comes to doing your bit, give us examples of what you find yourself or catch yourself doing at work to this end.
Sure. So I think first of all, it begins with basically the portfolio I run for MMA. I mean, have to quote that because that's where we do so much of it. So for example, whether it is ensuring, right representation of women leaders on the board, or it's ensuring the women POVs in all our, thought leadership platforms, some things which we consciously work at ensuring. And of course, a constant balance in any conversation or any kind of any charter we run, we ensure a conscious balance in terms of hearing both sides. So that's one. Second is, even on the personal front, I do factor in those angles even when I hire. So I think the pandemic is a new phenomena where people have learned how to be more flexible and allow work from home and various facets like these. But it's been an inherent style of working for me, because I myself have gained immensely from flexibility, and I know that it can really nurture a lot of women to shine in in the workforce if they're given that room, and therefore offering the flexibility and the opportunity to work in environments that suit them has been pretty much of a top priority always, right? So that's the second thing. Even the third thing is in terms of I've kind of whilst I've been in the digital space for the last 21 years, and when I started, it was a space full of men, with no offense to anybody, but that's how it was. And, the more I stayed in it, I saw a lot of women reaching out to me, wanting to know how the experiences and how they could be a part of it, because there was a very, very, silent desire, but they were not sure if that's for them. So the more they saw women come forward and be a part of it, the more they were also inspired to do it. So even by just bringing a lot of inspiration through what you do and talking to them and sharing the right perspective has been immensely helpful. So I think those are the few things which I've been constantly trying to do all the way.
Okay. No, I'm glad you mentioned hiring. So, RUBEENA, SAPNA, Preethi, what do you do? What's doing your bit for gender fairness at work? What do you do consciously?
Let me take that. Well, one conscious thing I do is, I think I encourage women to actually build a sisterhood, because it's, and, over the years, I've learned that that women were quite bad at actually networking. And I thought it was, beneath your dignity to network, because my work should speak for itself. Why do I need to do any of that? They didn't, I didn't have the time when I was younger and I had children. I had my daughter, I had to go home. I didn't have time to just hang out forever. But in retrospect, in hindsight, I think it's some of the most useful assets that you can build is a network. And I keep telling women do that, because one is it's a support system. The other is that it will help you in your professional development. Consciously doing that, and I'm part of many platforms that help you do that. So that's one. And the second is that I think, as Monica was saying, sharing your stories. I stayed the course. I was able to do it, and I'm not the most brilliant person on earth or anything, and I've gone through it, and it is possible. It's not difficult. Just don't give up, because there are times when women, because of child care and elder care, all of that responsibility falls on us. Those are the two things that I think I'm trying to help with.
That's lovely. SAPNA and then RUBEENA in that order. What do you do consciously? Do your bit.
I agree with all the comments made thus far, so I won't repeat. The additional thing I would add is, we have to look at the data and question continuously. There are the things that we can do organizationally or in our roles, like around networking and role models and role modeling and all of the great things that have been said. I think Preethi is, with the work that she shared today, right? Looking at the data and questioning is another thing I do every day. When we look at we're talking it's a modern marketing. No, there's no modern marketing without the internet. The internet is not equal. The internet's not equal. Leadership boards are not equal. Look at any data point across the board. There is inequity, and are we being transparent and talking about the actions that we can take to drive change? So for us, for example, people don't think about this. They think I'm a marketer, so therefore I'm making marketing campaigns and I can be representative. But actually, what I spend most of my time doing is making sure that our products are inclusive, and making sure that when a woman is searching on Google, for example, does she have to type in women's cricket to get the information that she needs about women's cricket? Or can she just type cricket? Because that's if a male was to just type cricket, he'll get the information he's looking for. Women have to sometimes go a couple steps further. And should it be so hard, right? So we're questioning the way we build our products, questioning the way that biases come into play across the board. And I think that's the role that we can play in our day-to-day work. This is beyond just the campaigns or creative.
No, it's very interesting, biases at the product and technology level. Absolutely. RUBEENA?
So after everybody said most of the things that we all end up spending our time on, I think, then an important part is that there's a lot of gender inequality, which is a result of these very multitude small scale incidents that add up over time. And, they seem unimportant. And they're regularly regarded as small annoyances, both by the women who are going through them or even the male colleagues, and just ignored. And they just think that it doesn't matter in the bigger picture. This gender fatigue then, makes these daily incidents essentially invisible to most of them. So I think what I've started doing over the past few years is to be able to acknowledge that these things are happening, and speak to people who are going through them and try and modify behaviors of the teams that I've worked with, and because I think it has to be done both with the men and the women, and this then opens up a possibility for the wider change, across our organizations, because when we think of gender, equality, most of us, often say that, yes, there is inequality, but it does not exist close to where I am or in my workplace. We often go away from it, and we do not want to acknowledge that. I think my goal has been to create a culture in my team where this gender equality can be openly discussed without assigning blame, or guilt, but instead having people at all levels of the organization who can proactively modify their behaviors in their day-to-day working lives for the larger good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just have to ask you, all of you, when it comes to work-life balance, this came up a little while earlier as well. Are men and women still held to a different standard? Because, RUBEENA, I'm reminded of your WhatsApp display picture, actually, where you've got multiple hands and you're holding a laptop in one hand and a dumbbell in one hand and a fork and a knife and cutlery. And, I've never seen a man do that. It's, are we held to a different standard when it comes to balancing and multitasking?
So is this open for all?
Anyone can answer, because this is something I'm telling you, I've never seen a man do that with multiple hands.
No, there's no doubt about it. I mean, anyone who says no, I mean, I don't know. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, there is a need, whether we're in India or anywhere else, whether you have kids or you don't, you know, if things are not all right at home, it is on us. If there is a family member that's unwell, it is on us. If your team member has an emotional problem, it is on us. And if the revenues are not in and you're driving a P&L because you want to be hard-nosed, it is on us. So yes, there's a lot of balancing to do. I really don't know if the men are, I haven't seen a lot of males managing as much as I have to, but maybe that's the limited world that I live in. But happy to hear from the others whether they struggle with this as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and you know, if anybody else has a strong opinion on this, they can chime in here.
Whilst I completely agree with Geetanjali, there is that default skew, and I think this conversation is not about really trying to sort of, you know, get away from it. But what I would say, and I'd say this from my personal experience, I think it's a lot to do with a woman's own aspiration on how much she wants to offer at a personal level and how much she wants to offer at a professional level, right? I personally know a lot of women who are doing very well for themselves in leadership roles and have enough support at back home to enable themselves with it, right? Or the other way around. So one is circumstantial, where circumstantially they're getting enabled one way or the other. And the other is aspirational. Like if I were to speak for myself, my aspiration has been as huge on personal as it is on professional. I personally want to ensure that I'm around when I need to be there. And I am, you know, always investing into my most primary circle in my circle, which is my family. So I think it's a lot personal. I know a lot of women who have a different level of aspiration, and that's absolutely okay. Each to its own.
Understood. So you're saying it's a choice. It's not always an expectation that you're living up to. Right. Okay, fine. Got it. I think we have time for one last question, and then I'll hand the baton back to Lloyd. I just want to know that, you know, I've been observing the Indian advertising media and marketing industry for about a decade now. And I've seen that at the entry level and the mid level, there are lots and lots of women. But something happens along the way and there aren't that many leading firms, whether it's on the marketing side or the agency side. So, you know, I'd love to hear from you. I want to know, what do you think happens along the way? What's the biggest barrier to leadership? Anyone, you know, Sapna, what do you think? RUBEENA, you've been in the ad space in the past. What happens along the way? We've got so many women joining, but that's not mirrored in the upper echelons.
I think life happens, Ashwini. I think life happens really, because it's not only in advertising, whatever, it's everywhere. That you know, that after it, I mean, families happen, children happen, things happen. It's and as Monika, as we've been saying so far, finally it's us, it's women who take on that role.
Sorry, yeah, Sapna. Yeah.
I was going to say I've worked in financial services, technology. There's some areas where it's worse. It's like that's it. I know that doesn't sound very promising, but I actually think a lot more is in our hands for us to create more balance, right? I think women are making different choices today, and I'll say on that question, I didn't answer it on is balance achievable? I didn't think so 5 or 10 years ago. I had twins, like in their single digits. It was hard, and I will say everything was on my plate. But when I decided to have a conversation about this with my husband, with other people, to your point, you can sometimes influence more change in your own setting than we sometimes think. I think sometimes fear holds us back, right? So I would say a lot is on our plate. Life happens. It is hard. But I also think sometimes some of it's within our own hands. And I can speak on behalf of, like at Google, it's been hard, but we've gotten to 50-50 in marketing on my team. Now you can argue maybe I'm at the helm of that. So we need more women in leadership positions, right? And we need to push, and we need to have transparency and have diversity reports and push, right? I think we can't assume that change isn't possible, is what I believe.
Yeah. No, to Preethi's point, you know, life happens and children happen. So maybe the discussion actually is equal parenting and not leadership at the workplace. But that's another panel discussion altogether, because we've run out of time and questions for this one. Lloyd, I'm handing the baton back to you because we're out of time. It's almost 4:30.
So before you do that, I personally want to say thank you to all of you. It's been a pleasure being with everybody on the panel, and I think this has been super insightful. I'm so glad we touched upon some really softer aspects of leadership, which was essential to bring alive, what we wanted to in terms of how women leaders can shape the future. So I'm hoping that we can do this again, and I'm hoping that this has been inspiring for the women workforce looking to get into our shoes. So thank you again.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
I totally echo what you said, Monica. I don't think we need another Women's Day to do this again. Well, we couldn't have asked for a better session than this to open this year. I'm sure the audiences must be feeling the same. I think we all need to believe in ourselves, believe that we can be that change which we all talk about. Okay, and which can enable growth for us as individuals, as organizations, and as industries. Hoping that these insights left behind by each of these women leaders, okay, can inspire us all, not just women, but men as well, to surge ahead. Quick thank you so much again to SAPNA, Preethi, GEETANJALI, RUBEENA, MONEKA, and last but by no means the least, ASHWINI. I think you did a fabulous job of driving this discussion, okay, and actually brought out the very best from each of these power leaders. No two ways about it.
Thank you.
And before I log off, also I'd like to shout out a big thank you to all our women members, which includes our board, our engaged partners, for enabling this growth journey with us to shape the future. In the meantime, for more updates, may I request the audience to please keep following us, because this is just the beginning of 2022. We have lots happening, and all of that will be updated on all of our social media handles. On that note, have a lovely evening ahead, and let's shape the future with her. Take care. Good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.